The gentleman is recognized for such time.
Mr. Chairman, I rise today in support of H.R. 3326, the World Bank Accountability Act, and frankly don't understand quite why every member is not rising in support of H.R. 3326. This is important legislation which is sponsored by my friend from Kentucky, the chairman of our Monetary Policy and Trade Subcommittee, Mr. Barr, and was co-sponsored by a senior Democrat on our committee, Mr. Sherman of California, and, Mr. Chairman, it passed our committee by unanimous vote, 60-0. Again, Mr. Chairman, this measure passed our committee by a unanimous vote of 60-0. H.R. 3326 makes a share of future World Bank appropriations contingent upon vitally needed reforms with focus on the bank's International Development Association, known as IDA or IDA, which is the bank's concessional lending window dedicated to 75 of the world's poorest countries. The reforms in this bill have emerged from 5 different oversight hearings, Mr. Chairman, held in our committee over the past 2 years, and they all enjoy bipartisan support. The bill also supports the administration's goal of ensuring that the World Bank's work is consistent with U.S. priorities and that are obviously financed by the U.S. taxpayer. In the President's FY18 budget, the administration called for holding to account international organizations whose missions don't advance U.S. foreign policy's interest or which haven't been well managed. H.R. 3326 would enact the administration's request for a 15% reduction in authorized funds for IDA. In addition, Mr. Barr's legislation contains crucial national security provisions, including a prohibition on World Bank assistance to countries that knowingly violate UN Security Council sanctions on North Korea. Also, safeguarding our national security is a provision that helps ensure World Bank assistance won't be used for state sponsors of terrorism. Mr. Chairman, this is a common sense requirement that benefited from the input of our Democratic colleague on the committee, again, Mr. Sherman of California. So again, Mr. Chairman, it does kind of beg the question, why are we here today? Why are we debating a bill that receives support from every single Republican and Democrat on the committee? As some who may be viewing our proceedings know, there is such a thing known as a suspension calendar for relatively non-controversial items. This bill should have been dispensed with on what is known as the suspension calendar since it passed our committee 60-0. But now, apparently, the ranking member has had a change of heart on opposing a bill that she voted for on committee. So some may be confused, and indeed we are confused, but it is interesting that we now see opposition to linking these IDA payments to reforms, but it's exactly what Democrats on the Financial Services Committee did in 2005. It's exactly what they did when they voted to withhold 25% of IDA funds in the Foreign Operations Appropriations Bill. And last July, the ranking member, the gentlelady from California, Ms. Waters, consistent with her earlier vote, voted in support of H.R. 3326 as well. And so again, some are confused that if she has voted for the policy of withholding twice, including voting for the very bill we're debating today, why it is being opposed now. It is also important to note, Mr. Chairman, that the reforms included in this bill are those that the World Bank itself deems are important. As far back as 1992, a bank management review highlighted its perverse staff incentives that made pushing money out the door more important than making a dent in global poverty. And as recently as 2014, a bank evaluation report confirmed that these very same perverse incentives are still in place. Then there's the notorious case of mismanagement in the Uganda Transport Sector Development Project, a scandalous bank initiative where a basic lack of project oversight led to the sexual exploitation of underage girls, repeated harassment of female staff, and deficient safety measures that very well may have resulted in 5 fatalities, lest we forget. In 2015, the World Bank's president had this to say, quote, "The multiple failures we've seen in this project on the part of the World Bank, the government of Uganda, and a government contractor are unacceptable. It is our obligation to properly supervise all investment projects to ensure that the poor and vulnerable are protected in our work. In this case, we did not. I am committed," the World Bank's president goes on to say, "to making sure that we do everything in our power, working with other stakeholders first, to fully review the circumstances of this project, and then to quickly learn from our and others' failures so they do not happen again," unquote. Mr. Chairman, if the World Bank thinks these reforms are necessary, shouldn't we all think these reforms are necessary? And how about the testimony of Sasha Chavkin, a reporter for the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, who testified before our committee, quote, "We found that over a decade spanning from 2004 to 2013, projects financed by the World Bank physically or economically displaced an estimated 3.4 million people around the world," unquote. Mr. Chairman, these are some of the world's most vulnerable, displaced by the World Bank, that screams out for more reforms. So I want to thank Mr. Barr for saying enough is enough. With his legislation, he has produced a serious and long and overdue reform bill, one that was supported in our committee unanimously, 60-0. We typically could not get a 60-0 vote on a Mother's Day resolution, yet we have it for this bill. And again, it just begs credibility and credulity. Why are we here today debating a bill that was passed unanimously in committee? I urge the House to adopt it unanimously, and I reserve the balance of my